And welcome to a new episode of Time Mag LP Discusses. It only took us 2 weeks to get to this episode. Delayed twice,
Yeah.
basically. So, I mean, I barely remember. I had everything planned out for what I was going to say, and now I remember none of it. So, I have a few notes, and that's pretty much what we're going off of.
Cool, because I don't remember what our questions were at all, so.
So, getting right into it, number one, I basically condensed whatever the hell mess that was into is not bad, good enough.
Okay.
Basically, in the original episode, I was talking about Lufia and how Lufia was a game that didn't really do anything wrong, but it didn't do anything particularly right either.
Yeah.
And so the end result was something that was just very mediocre and not particularly enjoyable to play.
Okay.
So that's, and I actually have I don't want to say better, but more contemporary example to this. And you'll know
Okay.
this because I've brought it up several times in our discussion in the past.
Oh, fun. Okay. What you got?
Shining Resonance
Hey, that was actually the same exact example I was going to use.
to me is the when people
Perfect
use the
example of it's just okay.
it is the most mediocre game I have ever seen in my life.
I don't know if mediocre is the right word. Mediocre, like, at least to me, implies bad. And it wasn't bad, it was just, it was.
Well, mediocre is supposed to be middle of the road.
Supposed to
Like
be, but
and but that's it is a game that I'm not going to say it had nothing going for it, but for everything it had going for it, it had something going against it to the point where the pros and cons were so line in line that they all canceled each other out and you ended up with nothing.
mostly agree.
Like I really like the visuals, like
Yeah.
the actual aesthetic design,
Okay.
but the maps are all fucking garbage
Yeah.
to like navigate and go through.
Hmm.
So it cancels each other out.
Makes sense.
The combat starts like has a nice flow to it,
Yeah.
but there's nothing to do. It is so shallow. It's just mash the button.
Yeah.
So again, just cancels itself out.
Fair enough.
Uh, the plot is nothing. It's not
Yeah.
offensively bad, but it hits
It's not notably good either. It's very generic and safe and
the main
not
character's a
exciting.
fucking pansy. It's the worst main character. But
He, but he's not the worst. He just exists. There are main characters who are like actively bad or shitty, and I personally didn't get that from him or that game in general. It was just a,
he was such a whiny little nothing. But
eh,
anyway,
I didn't get that, but
the point is like you gotta do it. It can't just be enough to be not bad. You can't be mediocre. You can't be middle of the road because we exist in an era where there's so many great things that being not bad isn't good enough. In a lot of cases, even being good isn't good enough.
disagree actually.
I think for
Because I mean, if you go into it knowing what it is and knowing that it's not going to do anything amazing, but it's not going to be super shitty, and you expect that going in and you're not let down by its averageness, it can be worthwhile. And if you're looking for something that fits that, I just want to kill some time with something simple, something non thought provoking, not. I don't want to get involved, not involving. It's great for that if you know that's what it is.
I just think there's better things for that. I mean, there's better things for every example of what it is. And the only place that it has value is if you're somebody who has played so many of these games. But I think for the average person who doesn't spend, a shit ton of time playing games,
Hmm.
there's just why would you bother? There's so many
No,
better things out there you can be doing with your time than Shining Resonance.
yeah, and if you're limited or you specifically want, I mean, it sounds weird to say if you want something good because you would think you always would, but sometimes I don't know, personally, I don't need something that's going to be serious or involving or that I'm going to have to care about. I just kind of want to sit down and play something mindless, and it fits that, and that's
And for most people, that's called a Bethesda game.
yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
saying. So,
But
I mean,
so
it's something like to use another example of a game like Tokyo Xanadu is one where I have a hard time landing on where to put it because it's another game where I mean it's way better than Shining Resonance and there's actually reasons to play it and that's where again it has pluses.
yeah,
It's just that it doesn't quite have enough pluses to where
just to
it
stand out as actually good.
the it's good, it's just not great.
Yeah.
And that's really hard when you could be playing so many other great games that are out right now. I mean, it's like why would you play Tokyo Xanadu over something like Cold Steel if you've never played uh, Falcom RPG?
Because I mean,
Or you could go with
get
Ys.
I get your point, but with that particular one, I disagree because my thought with that is that there's not one that has that level of character or that much of a story or that kind of real-time combat. There's always something that does it each one of those three things better, but for having all three of those specifically, I don't feel like there's a whole lot of other options.
It's just one of those things though where every single thing it does has been done better elsewhere. So
Yes, but
unless
not together.
for whatever reason you need all those things together, which again it doesn't
Is occasionally
excel
nice.
at everything that it tries to do. So
No, it doesn't.
eh,
But it has all of those things. And if you like all of those things, then you can be happy with this and you can actually call this good because it has all of these mechanics or things that you like all in one package.
but
Even if
that
they're not even if they're not, 100% amazing like they are in other games, 75 on all three is still better than 100 on one and 0 on the others.
it's not even remotely 75 on all three is the problem. If it was 75 on all three, then that wouldn't be that'd be a pretty good game. The problem is like the combat is super shallow. There's pretty much nothing to it. The characters are good for one game, but not great.
I don't know.
It's kind of it, it's like middle of the
Yeah,
road for everything.
yeah, yeah, I don't know. But again, I just did actively like that one. That's a game that I wouldn't call averagey to me personally.
I'm not calling it averagey.
No,
That's
it's a
my whole
you just
point. It's
no,
good. It's above
yeah,
average. It's just that you're in an era where there's so many excellent top tier things.
yeah.
That's what I'm saying. It's like you have to compete in a world with shit like Persona and
Hmm.
fucking SMT. Like a lot of people love Dragon Quest XI, even though I don't give a fuck. And that's just in Jerpagas. Outside of Jerpagas, God, there's so much good shit
Yeah.
that it's like you can't just release a mediocre middling game. And I'm not saying that Tokyo Xanadu is, but like to get back to the original question, mediocre is not good enough. Even good in this era is not necessarily good enough. you'll have your place, but I mean, you'll still be niche. Tokyo Xanadu happened and fucking nobody talks about it, even among the
Yeah,
Falcom circle. And
yeah,
I think it's tragic because basically all Falcom does anymore is Yeast and Trails because that's what sells,
yeah.
because that's what, most people want. Tokyo Xanadu just kind of happened and then people moved on.
Mm,
And don't get me wrong, dude, if there's a sequel, I'll be down.
yeah.
But again,
So then,
just using that.
so then, do you think that the just okay should stick to experimental stuff then? Like, okay, but not good is acceptable if it's experimental and trying something new in that niche indie whatever market. But if it's going for mainstream appeal, then it has to be above quality.
I mean, you should always aim for the highest quality.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying you would go out to make something average. You always want something good, but is average acceptable if it's average but unique?
That's going to depend on the person. And
I,
I know
but I
that
mean,
sounds like a cop out, but it depends on how you're defining unique. The problem with
it
unique
depends.
is that
It depends on the person and the mechanic, yes, but I'm saying in general, broad strokes. Some company tries something new and creative that's never been seen before, and it's just okay.
it,
Is that still worth acknowledging, even though it was just okay because it was unique?
it's going to depend on what they did that was different. Like nothing that Tokyo Xanadu does is unique. It
No,
just takes a
uh,
bunch of elements from things that you already know.
no, I'm not talking about
And
Tokyo
well,
Xanadu,
let me
because,
finish my thought.
alright, what?
It takes a bunch of elements from things you already know and constructs them in a way that you mostly already know.
Yeah,
But if you look at something like the original Nier, which
yeah,
is a very rough around the edges game,
yeah,
but people like it for the things that it does that are, it's very different from the norm.
yeah.
And that's basically Taro in general. It it becomes a different argument. And the problem is that we're trying to apply objective statements to subjective things.
Yeah,
So like I don't really like I'm like the only person who played Automata and was like, oh, that was okay.
yeah.
I didn't think it was like a fucking fantastic game or mind blowing or whatever, but it sold like 15 zillion copies. Like people loved it.
Yeah, I loved it.
So in that instance, I mean, it doesn't really work with Automata because then they had the budget. But in the case of the original Nier, there
Yeah,
are a lot of people who really love that game, and I at
yes.
least acknowledge that game for what it did differently.
Okay.
So in that sense, the unique elements do make up for the lack of polish. But to be able to give a universal answer to that is nearly
I'm,
impossible because
like, I'm just talking broad strokes.
again, it
Not,
just depends on what you tried to do and how you tried to execute it. I mean,
duh.
you look at something like Undertale, which
Okay,
was hugely overblown, but okay, it did something different.
okay.
And it was just a small indie game that worked within its scope.
Yeah,
I feel, but that's not really a mediocre game, but it's more the concept of scope that I was going for. You know, recognize that there's a time and place to be fucking around with everything.
yeah,
I think a lot of the problems with contemporary Final Fantasy games is that every game since 10 has been trying to reinvent the franchise,
yeah. And it
and
kind of generally doesn't work.
they all have massive problems
Hmm?
because you're trying to reinvent the wheel on a game, on a project that costs so much money and is going to have so many just development pitfalls and challenges and whatnot. Maybe don't do that here.
So you keep your experimenting in indie until you get it figured out?
or just mediocre budget. Nier isn't indie, far from it, but it still wasn't full budget either. There's a middle
Okay,
ground.
so you keep your experimental stuff cheap until you figure it out.
You play to your budget, but again, what's the goal of your project ultimately?
Make
You
money.
know, well, it depends on the studio.
Oh, it's make money. It's a business. The goal is make money.
Well, that's the goal for the publisher, maybe. But I mean, you look at a game like any of your big sellers, like your Rockstar Studio games. Their goal is primarily to make money.
Yes.
I don't particularly get the sense that there's a whole lot of heart or soul to their games.
Yeah.
But then I look at some of the smaller games, like even something like Tokyo Xanadu to me at least has the sense of something that wanted to be made because the developers wanted to make it,
Yeah.
rather than something that was made because it's this big product and we can make a bazillion dollars.
Okay.
And I think that that's more important than necessarily the experimentation. And a lot of times, budget tends to be a reflection of intention because the higher budget something is, the more money it has to make in order to recoup the cost of making it.
Okay. I'm sorry for the pause. I'm trying to connect where we are now back to our original question, and I got lost somewhere along the way of.
Well, then let's just move on if we're this far off track. Let's just move to a different fucking track. Because, I mean, the point is, at the end of the day, it's subjective. There's only so much you can talk about because there's just going to be these small, weird things that appeal to people for God knows what reason. I
Yeah, but
adore one way
so
heroics.
we're not talking about specific examples or anything. We're just talking super general broad strokes. So we're not worried about the subjectiveness of particular examples or anything.
But that's what I'm
I'm
saying.
just I'm just asking broad strokes in general, experimentation versus super standard already exists content. Is unique experimental stuff, does it get away with being averagey because it's trying something new? Yes or no? Broad strokes.
It depends on what part of it is average. If the parts of it are average, are the parts that have already been done before, then you can get away with it. If the parts of it that are average is the stuff that you're innovating on, then it's less forgivable.
Okay. I will actually go. Cool. I'm cool with that. I'm
Okay,
cool with that answer, actually.
next
All right.
question then.
Sure. Let's do it.
All right. So the next question was some dumb Zelda question that I don't even think there was a question.
Okay. It was just a Zelda rant.
I think I was just ranting about new and old Zelda, and I don't care
That
enough about Zelda to.
that sounds vaguely familiar. Like it was about the structure of Zeldas where it used to be open and dungeony, and then it became much more linear and which is better or something like that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I still stand by the idea, and this isn't just a Zelda thing. This is also a Metroidvania thing.
Okay.
Any semi-open world design, where I think it's more enjoyable when the world is static, in the sense that it's always there, but it's your character gaining new abilities that lets you traverse the world or causes it to open up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Instead of the world changing.
yeah. Like the example I use is uh, taking let's say you need to get past the guard in Ocarina of Time to get to Death Mountain, and you
Okay.
do it by taking the letter from Princess Zelda and giving it to the guard, and then the guard opens the gate.
Okay.
In that sense, the world has changed, And to me, it's not as satisfying as like to get into Gerudo Valley in the same game.
Hmm.
The bridge is always just out,
Yeah.
but eventually you get the hook shot, and then you can hook shot over the gap.
Okay.
So in that sense, the world hasn't changed. You've just gained a new ability that allows you to open up more of the world.
Okay. I agree in parts. I like the idea of the world changing if it's part of, like, I almost want to say part of the narrative or part of the story, that something happens that affects the world that makes it change. Otherwise, if the game is based around exploring the world, more like a Metroidvania, then I'll agree with the idea of static world but changing character.
Yeah, and that's really all that I have to say on the topic. I
Cool.
so our third question, which I really really don't like,
I
actually.
Well, that's why I wanted to change it with my new personal question of making it more specific,
So the broad question was, what is an RPG?
which
And
is way too broad a question.
my problem with it comes down to my problem with genre in general.
Yeah.
And that's that I think people tend to focus too much on genre when realistically the function of genre is just to give you a broad categorization,
Okay.
because when you start thinking too stringently on what defines genre,
Hmm.
you start to realize that every single game has its own quirks,
Yeah.
and that's where and it starts the concept of genre and what you're defining it for starts to lose its purpose. Because realistically, why do we need to differentiate genres? Mostly it's
Quickly
to,
to tell apart one general style from another general style,
right, for the purpose of discussion, or to easily find
like
something like if you're a consumer.
sorting or cataloging or separating, whatever.
Yeah. And when you start spending more time debating on where something should go
Hmm.
between two fairly similar categories,
Yeah.
it it becomes, rather than a discussion about the thing, it becomes a discussion about the thing you're discussing. The ends and the means get flipped, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Like let's take the example of Fire Emblem and the Three Houses.
Okay.
I don't consider that a JRPG by any metric.
Yeah.
You supposedly do, and we could
In
sit
some
here
aspects. Yeah.
and argue about it for the next hour, but to what end and for what purpose?
Yeah. At that point, we're debating labels, not so much the game itself.
Ultimately, would you not call it a strategy RPG at the end of the day, like first and foremost?
Strategy RPG. Yeah.
Or tactical RPG I've seen thrown around, I think is probably more accurate, but whatever. You know, that turn-based, grid-based, your Final Fantasy Tactics, your Fire Emblems,
Hmm.
Growlands, or that style.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
it's one of those, and everything else, who cares? Like, it's just specific to the game. Like, it has JRPG elements in it,
Yeah.
and that's, you get so many things nowadays that borrow elements from other things. I mean, having a shooter with RPG elements is pretty common nowadays.
It's like almost everything has RPG elements of some kind.
Whether it's light RPG elements like Call of Duty game, where you just rank up and unlock new guns in multiplayer,
Hmm.
to something like a Fallout game.
Where you have actual levels and skills, and it's a lot more of a focus on that.
Yeah, and it's just a sliding scale.
Hmm.
Obviously, you'd call Fallout more of an RPG than Call of Duty, but and the reason I
Yeah.
say this is like Dark Souls is one where a lot of times people argue three categorizations: is it an action game? Is it a role playing game? Is it a JRPG?
Okay.
And
I can see the justifications for each three, but I can also see why it's not each of the three.
and that's
And
where, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, and it fits all of them, but it also doesn't really fit any of them.
And that's where to me it's an action role playing game, and arguing anything further down that road, it doesn't serve much purpose.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's how I feel about genre. It, the idea is to describe something as broadly as possible so that it can be kind of compared to the things around it.
Okay.
And generally, what are the staples of RPGs? It's mostly emphasis on character progression through stats.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So
Stats or some kind of leveling system.
yeah.
Okay.
Do you have anything else to say to that, or are we moving on?
Uh,
Does
probably
that
all right.
does that answer your other question as well?
Yeah, as well as it needs to be.
So do you want to go ahead and ask it, or do we just move on to my question, which is the last one?
We can move on, see what you got.
Okay, so my last question, which is the new question for the night, which is what do you look for in a new RPG? And specifically, what I'm thinking is like first impressions. Before you've read a review, before you've really like read the description, what is it that like catches your eye? So, did
I'm
you?
trying to think like what
So for
what point in discovering the game are we talking about? Like I just heard the title and I Googled it, or
yeah, kind of like you've just kind of looked at a little bit of gameplay or seen a few screenshots or something. You haven't read any reviews or anything.
okay, just enough to see if you're gonna care to read reviews and maybe get it.
Well, like, okay, let me answer the question and see if this gives you a better idea.
Okay.
So for me, what really draws me into a game is color. I really like color and color saturation, which is
Okay.
why I tend to be drawn more towards the anime style games.
Okay.
It's not as much about the anime aesthetic as it is usually anime style games have a lot more color to their world. They have more vibrant worlds. It's one of the biggest reasons I look at Xenoblade 2. I mean, it's basically the reason I got Xenoblade 2
Yeah.
because that game has so much color. And to
Yeah.
this day, I love that game's aesthetics just because it's so much color everywhere. I love it. And
Okay.
that's something important to me. If an RPG or really any game has that sort of brown medieval realistic grimy aesthetic,
Yeah.
I'm not as drawn to it as I am as something that's just colorful and vibrant.
Okay.
Does that give you an idea about the question?
Eh, yes and no. I mean, that's to me that just feels like eh, I don't know how to exactly say what I'm thinking. It's weird.
It's a first impression thing. It's not going to sell you on the game inherently, but it's what catches your eye, what makes it stand out.
Okay. I'll agree with color. For me, I'd probably go more with character design.
Okay. What about like? Can you give any specifics? What about
Something
character?
something unique, which has been getting more difficult with the modern JRPGs of where they're all set in the real world and wear just school uniforms. But the ones that don't, where shit actually looks unique and interesting, like it's something new. Like where the characters themselves feel like, I don't want to say like they're not people, but they're not like normal people.
Okay.
Which sounds weird as shit, I know, but the thing that's coming to mind is I'm thinking about Persona 5.
Okay.
And when I look at the characters in general, like the real world versions, they look kind of boring. They're all just wearing the same basic school uniform. But on all the posters and the pictures and everything, they show them all in the thief's outfits, and they have these much more unique and like emotive designs to kind of tell who the character is and make them interesting. Like I want to know more about the character and why that weird specific look fits their personality.
Have you ever played Kingdom Hearts?
Long ass time ago.
Land of the fucking weird designs. Because Nomura.
And I like the weird designs.
I mean, more power to you. I can't say I do, but that's not the only thing I don't like about Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, it has other issues, but that's not today's question.
No, God, no. And I think that's it. I mean, unless you have anything to expand on in anything we've talked about tonight.
Particularly, not that I can think of that comes off, off the top of my head.
All right. Then I guess we will call it a week this week. And I have an idea what I want to do next week, and it's going to be something a little bit different.
Alrighty, fun.
So look forward to it.